Hi, Mark. Can you just have a chat about marketing for a bit? So, how in your group of businesses do you go about measuring return on marketing?
It's quite complex, and it's not 100% black and white. Some parts of it are difficult to measure. However, we look at the specific areas that we are looking to market. So let's take a simple one, which is one of the first ones I ever started with was teeth whitening. And so we would do some advertising on teeth whitening. We would have maybe a flyer. We've done things like, the local billboards. We've done, and then obviously there's online marketing as well that we spend. So there are a number of things that we look at, and obviously nowadays, social media marketing. So there are a number of different ways of looking at how many eyes come on to whatever area of marketing, and that's really good for online. So how many people click on either your online ads, or how many impressions you get on your social media. But really, what we want to see is phone calls into the practice. And so if we do a targeted campaign, what we've done historically in the past is put a different phone number called a call tracker number on each marketing system or each marketing effort that we make. And that feeds back to us how many calls have come through each area. We also look at the number of clicks that lead through to our website. And what that tells us is that the marketing is working. And so everything and I see this, there's a conversation I have with dentists quite often. My marketing's not working, or my marketing's not giving me the return on the investment I'm looking for. And then first I ask is, what are you measuring? They quite often say, well, it's the end result. There are so many steps along the journey that the ball can be dropped. So first of all, we measure those marketing areas. Are those marketing areas working? Are the phone calls happening, and are the click-through rates? And you've got to start and get a benchmark there. So it's not a case of, well, you should be having X, like I see sometimes reported in the dental press, for every pound you spend, you should have X. You have to benchmark that yourself, because every areas can be different. But it also has a big impact on, for your return, is how well you answer the phones, how quick you are to respond to inquiries, and then what your patient journey looks like. So if your marketing works, and that's effectively the advertising, and then it's your call handling. So how many of your calls that come through to the practice actually get answered? So that's something that we measure. How many are going to an engaged tone, or an answer machine if it's out of hours? So these things. We then look to measure, okay, for all the people that come round who we answer calls and we go through inquiries, how many of them actually convert into patients? And so each step will have a drop-off rate. And I always say that when you're as a practice, you start to get the benchmark. So say you are advertising for Invisalign, which is, probably one of the most common ones. You marketing for Invisalign. For that first 3 months, you're really testing to see where your benchmarks come in before you start to improve. And before you start to increase the spend on the marketing, what you want to do is improve the training and the conversion rates for each of those steps between your call answering and the conversion rate, particularly around if you've got TCOs, if you've got your clinicians doing the consults. If you improve those efforts before you start spending more money on the actual advertising part, that's the smartest way to do things, in my opinion.
So, I know we've talked about this when we have our normal reviews. How do you define what to spend your marketing budget on?
It's all based on your practice goals, and I know that we've set out with all the delegates on business mastery course that we have a 10-year goal, and they start to define what area their focus is. So what we advertise as a private practice that does all on four and vertical bone grafting and all this type of stuff in comparison to a practice that is maybe does mixed private or purely NHS, and maybe saying that we're open to accepting NHS patients. So I think it is based on your own practice goals. What I would also say is that almost all practices would say we want good quality restorative type dentistry patients. How well is your practice set up for that? What's the patient experience like? What's the journey like for them? And would you expect patients that are looking for a high spend to come into your practice with all the pieces that you have there? So try to, and it can be an evolution. My first squat practice was not the nicest looking practice. We didn't have the patient journey all in place. And so we evolved that over a number of years to achieve, the successes that it gets just now. So it's understanding where you want to be over the next 12 months, over the next 3 years in particular, but with a view of where you want to be over the next 10 years is where you start to market, and what is the skill set within your team as well? What are they able to deliver on?
Thanks, Mark. So what metrics do you have in place to measure your marketing?
Okay, so we look at the various things, we look at less so now, but when you really start, because we know it works, you look at things like the click-through rates and impressions. Of particular importance to me is what the number of inquiries that we get, and we have a system of taking record of them within the practice. So how many new patients are inquiring, book appointments, how many patients are inquiring don't book appointments, and what that tells us is how our marketing is working. So these are the phone calls, these are the emails, these are the online website inquiry forms that we receive. How many of them go into a consultation? That tells us how well we have prepared the patient before they come in to see us. So all these aspects of influence that we've discussed before, Andy. So one practice may have a very high conversion of those patients who inquire into consultation. That'll be met by a number of factors of how well do we show up on our website, on our social media, and how well, of particular importance and a real focus for our company right now, how well do we answer those calls? Are we nurturing that person? Are we, we used to look at our calls and training and say, and go through a step process. We actually pulled all that back to say, first and foremost, help the patient who's inquiring. We don't cold call anybody in dentistry. These people have called us for information to help them. So let's make sure we spend time helping that person first and foremost, and help them choose us effectively. So call handling, vitally important. So we measure those metrics. Then we assess all the costs. We assess all the conversion rates that go in there. We break that down into, okay, what is the cost per inquiry? What is the cost per consultation? And then what is the cost per patient? And not until each of those steps is sitting in our target area do we then look to increase the spend in our marketing. Because it's easy to do a shotgun approach in marketing companies. Not my personal experience, because my guys don't do it, but from a lot of my friends and colleagues who have had challenges in the past, it can be a bit of a scattergun approach. Spend £1,000 here in SEO, spend £4,000 on pay-per-click, spend 2,000 on your social media boosted posts and stuff, and that's not a strategy for me. The strategy needs to be put together with what the actual outcome is at the end. And I'll be honest, it's often not the marketing company's fault. They're what they see as their responsibility is to get the inquiry. What they see as the practice's responsibility is to convert them to a patient. So they feel that their job's done. The guys that we work with, they don't. They see it as it has to start and get to the end for the patient for the inquiry to become a patient, and they see part of that as their responsibility as well as the practice. So we share those numbers with them, and so things get tweaked and developed. But say for instance, we've had recently a treatment coordinator decides to move on, or we lose someone at front of house, as we've all experienced, particularly with the post-COVID years and team members moving on to do different things. The marketing still will be working the exact same, yet the outcome at the end, we've seen a massive drops off that have highlighted to a huge degree for us how important it is to have our front of house team member, that it is to have our treatment coordinator, and even with our newer dentists coming in, that we do some degree of how to communicate appropriately with a patient. And so we've done a lot of kind of Cialdini type training with our team around influence, and that's been a huge help. So all these factors and all these steps, we measure each step as we go, and so that we can identify exactly where the problem or the bottleneck can be.
Thanks, Mark. Some good nuggets in there.
Hey, Andy, can you possibly explain to us what the difference is between something that often gets confused, but the difference between CAPEX and OPEX?
Yeah. CAPEX, which is obviously short for capital expenditure, refers to the purchase, the buying of fixed assets. And when you get a set of accounts at year end from your accountant, it's two parts to that. There's a P&L account and a balance sheet. And on your balance sheet, there's a section called fixed assets. Fixed assets are things that you keep for greater than 1 year. Within the fixed asset section, there's going to be potentially land and buildings, and there's going to be fixes and fittings, so cabinetry, equipment. There's also those are referred to as tangible fixed assets. The other fixed asset you may have, which is referred to as intangible, is goodwill. And of course, when we then look at the P&L, the expenditure that we see that is a deduction from sales that determines your net profit, the items that appear in the P&L are referred to as OPEX, or operating expenditure. So when you spend money on a fixed asset, okay, you will be over a period of time, each asset has a different category. So some are in like 10 years, some are over 3 years, and we depreciate those assets because it would be misleading to charge the whole cost of an asset to the profit and loss account in the year that you buy it. So imagine you've got 2 identical years and you make 100 grand profit, and in one of those years you buy a machine for 50k and you decide to charge it all to the P&L account in the year that you've procured it. So then the result for that year is now 50k because you've just added the writing off of a machine that should have gone to CAPEX, and in the second year you make 100 grand profit. So you pick that piece of paper up and you think, I've got a very different performance here from a business, and in actual fact you haven't. It's the way you've fed the purchase of that asset into the P&L. I think the other thing too is that when you procure a fixed asset, there's also different ways to buy it that would have an impact on the P&L. So for argument's sake, you could pay cash. So if you paid cash, you'd have the asset on the balance sheet, and the only way that would appear in the P&L in future years is via depreciation. Okay, so maybe you feed that in maybe over, say, 5 years. The second way would be that obviously if you can't afford to pay cash for the asset, you have to take some form of a loan. You could get a bank loan, you could get hire purchase, and they're very similar in nature, and then the other way is to take a lease. So we always tell people if they have to borrow money, to get it on hire purchase or a bank loan rather than a lease. And the reason for that is that when you make a monthly repayment, so let's say you're paying £1,500 a month back over 36 months, with hire purchase, every repayment that you make is a split between capital and interest, just like with your mortgage. So you've got this liability on your balance sheet because you owe now somebody for the loan that you've taken out on hire purchase, and every month you're going to make a repayment. Now the capital element of that repayment is reducing the balance on the balance sheet, the indebtedness, so your liability is going down, and only the interest element goes into the P&L. And then of course, when you come to get your tax relief, because you own that asset, then effectively you get your tax relief in year one, first year capital allowances. So you've accelerated the tax relief to year one. And of course, from a P&L point of view, your profit doesn't reduce that much because there's only the interest getting fed back in. When you lease, that's regarded as rental, and therefore you don't own the asset, okay? And the whole of the payment isn't split between capital and interest. The whole of the £1,500 goes into the P&L, and effectively, because you don't own the asset, you don't get your first year capital allowance. So your tax relief, therefore, is gained by feeding in the £1,500 for a year, and then the second year and the third year. So effectively, you're reducing your profits over 3 years, and as such, getting your tax relief by having lower taxable profits over those 3 years. That's quite interesting when it comes to sale as well. Don't forget, we look at things like EBITDA, and obviously things like the interest get added back. So when you're looking at, people often say to me, I'm thinking of buying a machine, etc. Do you think I should be doing that when I'm selling the business? And of course, you normally, when you sell a business, you would settle most of the debts because you sell it cash-free, debt-free. But in terms of the P&L and the valuation, things like your loan interest are going to get added back. So it makes no difference to your valuation whatsoever. Okay,
that's great, Andy. Thank you. Okay, so in dental practice, we don't get taught around how to do the business planning through dental school, and there's very little being taught in dentistry. And a lot of practices are going on at the moment, doing business as usual with no idea how to carry out strategic planning. How do you, and where do you see the point is in strategic planning, and what are the differences that you see from practices that are doing nothing and then become clients of yours that then move forward with a real strategic plan in place?
Yeah, it's very important. I did my training in very large corporates. One in particular was a very large brewery that's now known as Diageo. I was there 13 years and worked for a guy that was really at the top of his game, a guy called Paul Walsh, who went on to be the CEO of Diageo. And every year we had these 9 sites, and the site in Manchester where I worked would take you best part of an hour to walk around it. Massive site. And every year when we started the business planning process, he'd start by asking the same question: what business are we in? What business should we be in? And every year we'd answer the question the same way: well, we're in brewing. Okay. And towards the end of my career there was a change from the government, what was then known as the Monopolies and Mergers Commission, and they decided that they were going to give brewing a shake-up, and if you had more than 2,000 pubs, you couldn't have a brewery. So you could have a brewery and 1,999 pubs, but if you had 2,000 pubs, you had to get rid of your brewery, you had to sell it to somebody else. And they thought that was going to stimulate competition. And the year that we did the strategic planning, I was amazed when the answer to that question, what business are you in, what business should you be in, was answered a different way. And what they decided was that they were going to be a brands company, they were going to retain the estate, and they were going to offload the brewing. And they've got 9 breweries, and it'd take you best part of an hour to walk around each one. I'm going to sell that. I'm no longer a brewer. And that's the important thing, that it's looking far into the future, usually 3 to 5 years, and it's looking where the money's moving. Where are you going to make your money in the future? And the money moves in every market over time. And the people who are looking at that strategically are the people that are aware that tomorrow is not going to be like yesterday, and therefore plan to take advantage of the market conditions. And other people don't do that. They don't wake up and smell the coffee till it's too late. So it's basically making certain that you understand where the business is going in the medium to long term. Now, that's what we call strategic planning. And if you look at what a lot of the academics say, there's a lot of confusion about business planning and strategic planning. My take on it is that strategic planning is part of an overall business planning process. And business planning encompasses both the long-term planning, i.e. strategic planning, which is I have a vision, and you've heard me say many times, you ask people if they've got a vision, and very often they've got no tangible means of telling you whether they should be taking that journey. So if I say to somebody, have you got a vision? And they tell me what that is, and I go, well, have you got a financial plan that tells you that that's a sensible journey to take? In 3 years' time, are you going to wake up with a result that you're hoping for? And very often, 99 times out of 100, people haven't got a strategic plan. So they've got a vision, but they don't actually know what the roadmap is and what is going to be the financial consequences, good or bad, of taking that journey. And that's what the strategic plan does. It maps out and tells you you're on the right path. And along the way, it tells you the major changes that you're going to have to take. So if you say, well, I want to own 50 practices in 10 years' time, how many are we going to have along each step of the way? How many what's the funding going to be for that? What's the market conditions going to be in terms of, where you're going to find those practices? What are going to be the returns on them? So you're actually mapping that long-term journey out to know before you start on the journey that it's a sensible journey to be taking. Business planning encompasses both that long-term planning and the short-term. So the way we work at SOBP is that we do a 3-year plan to show you the general direction of financial travel, and then we take year one, and then year one becomes the plan for that year. So you're doing both short-term planning and long-term planning under the umbrella of what we call business planning. There was a famous saying, and I always quote this particularly to new clients or prospects. Make sure that your ladder is leaning against the right wall before you run up it, because if you don't, you just get to the wrong place faster. And that's what they say in business. Always strategy before tactics, and tactics is the more day-to-day, whereas strategy is long-term, all coming under the umbrella of what I call business planning.
Fantastic, Andy. Thank you.